Gotcha.
Different people are coming than are normally here. We've got a certain crowd of trained, people are trained. So, but I'm thrilled that they're here. And Maggie will be first, and when I'm not going to be the one to introduce you. Diane will be. There'll be a point where you'll stand up and go to the podium. And then equally for each of you. Pretty quick. Okay. We'll give it a couple minutes because we said there are people not much. It's filling out. I was
Everybody, we're going to get started. If you could find your seats, please. Trish, can you wait with that until the introduction? Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Diane Duran. I'm with the Program Committee for Butler County Historical Society, and I am filling in for Gina Barleen, who is the Program Coordinator for Butler County Historical Society, and she has a terrible cold and is not able to speak that long. So we should commend Gina for all the work that she's done with this program. The land, yes. The land beneath where we sit tonight, to us, has always been Butler County. Of course, this isn't the case. This plot of around 590 square miles has only been Butler County since 1868. That's a tiny blip in history. 157 years. Yet for thousands of years, this land was home to generations of people, long before our pioneer ancestors arrived. If we were to travel back in time 12,000 years ago and looked down onto the Platte Valley by Bellwood or Octavia or Linwood, we might see a massive herd of bison, or maybe standing right here on top of the bluffs where we are now, we'd see huge mammoths lumbering across the plain, their long tusks shining in the same sun that shines on us now. And we might see ancient people who lived in this area, the Paleo Indians, hunting right here on fields we now plow, or on the tall grasses where this town of David City would someday be built. These first people's lives were woven into the rhythms of this land, just like ours are now. We are a very different type of society with a very different way of working and living, but we're still at the mercy of weather, we still have children, and we live in communities of family and friends. If we went back to 1200 AD and stood 16 miles southwest of here, if you can picture that, we might see people living in two small earth lodges by what is now Ulysses. In 1989, as workers carved, 1889 I bet, as workers carved a new highway near the town, 1989, okay. In 1989, as workers carved a new highway near the town, they uncovered the foundations of two ancient homes, buried for nearly 800 years. These people would have planted patches of corn and made tools to hunt small game. They foraged for plants, fished, and gathered mussels from the Blue River. These people were only in our area for a few years, between 1200 and 1300 AD, and yet they left remnants of their presence here in what would become Butler County. Ulysses was already a town in 1877, and if we'd have been there at that time, we might have seen another native people here in Butler County. But these people did not live in that area. They were just passing through, and not by choice. You see, in 1877, the Ponca people were forced from their homeland by the Nile River up in what is now called Knox County. They were marched south to Indian Territory, a grueling 600-mile journey that cut past Ulysses. The trail was harsh, and many of them died. Among those lost was Chief Standing Bear's daughter, Prairie Flower, who was laid to rest in Milford. They went on to Oklahoma, to the land the government assigned them, but it was swampy, unlivable, and made the people sick. Chief Standing Bear's son, Bear Shield, would succumb to malaria, one of 200 Ponca who died there. Of course, most of us know the story of Chief Standing Bear and how he tried to take his son's body to bury him on Ponca land. Standing Bear's imprisonment and trial led to his famous words to the judge, which ended with, "The same God made us both." His words broke through the walls of injustice, and the judge ruled that an Indian is a person under the law. Standing Bear was freed and allowed to lay his son to rest on Ponca land. Today, his likeness stands in the U.S. Capitol's National Statuary Hall. But tonight, here, 148 years later, in 2025, we turn our focus to the people who lived here for generation after generation, long before our ancestors arrived here in what is now Butler County, the Pawnee people. For many of us, what we know of the Pawnee in Butler County comes from Alfred Tahachuk of Linwood, who in the 1970s donated the Pawnee artifacts he had found over the years on his family's farm. And many of those artifacts are now displayed in the Depot Museum, and some are here with us tonight. Much of what was written about the Pawnee people in historic local newspapers and books was shaped by the writers' personal interpretations and often filled with sensationalism or misunderstanding common to that era. These accounts were not the history of the Pawnee. They were stories that told white people's interpretation of who the Pawnee people were, a very different thing. Tonight we have the opportunity to hear the authentic history of the Pawnee people, not through secondhand accounts, but from a representative of the Pawnee people, a Pawnee chief who is a descendant of the Pawnee who once lived by Linwood, right here in what is now Butler County. He brings with him stories and wisdom passed down from his Pawnee ancestors. And so, we are proud to provide a program for you tonight with 3 people who will talk about the Pawnee. All of our speakers are experts in their fields. Broc Anderson, to the far left, is the Director of Historic Sites for the Nebraska State Historical Society. In the middle is Nancy Carlson, an anthropologist and archaeologist, and we are honored to have our keynote speaker for this evening representing the Pawnee people, Matt Reed of Pawnee, Oklahoma. Matt attended Oklahoma State University, where he graduated in 1996 with a BA in history, and in 1998 with an MA in applied history. Since 2017, Matt has been the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Pawnee Nation, and we are honored to have Matt with us this evening. He has traveled here all the way from Pawnee, Oklahoma. Please join me in welcoming Matt Reed.
I hate standing behind one of those. Nawa, Bawa Suksakat, Chalikstaka, Dipistrabiwahut, Kaweta Sita, Dr. Matt Reed, Dr. Chawi, Dr. Saru Chawi, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Pawnee Nation. So, from talking just a little bit to everybody today, I get the feeling everybody thinks I come up here on rare occasion. I'm up here a lot. I was up here all last week. I went through the blizzard and the power outage and everything. So I turned around, went back to Pawnee on Thursday, real happy. Found storm damage at my house from a gust storm. Then Friday I fixed that. Saturday we had a dance. Sunday I did laundry. Today I'm back. So that's a lot of, and I've got 2 or 3 more projects. So April's going to be fun. I just wanted to, I'm going to give you a little bit of a presentation to kind of give you background with the things that they're going to be talking about. I'll touch on those as well. And I'm going to try to condense probably 2,000 years worth of history into, 30 minutes or so. And then we're going to hold questions till everybody's spoken. And then we'll give you guys time to just pelt us with anything. Like what she was saying, we're all setting on our traditional homelands. And a lot of tribes will have immigration stories, to how they got to their homelands or things like that. And I think we're kind of fortunate that we don't have an immigration story. This is where we've always been. So somewhere back before anything was created, it was just darkness. And our creator, who's called Titawahut, and then these days he's called the Titawahut, which means our father. He created everything, created the stars. And finally, that wasn't enough. And so he asked those 4 main stars that hold up the heavens to start creating everything else. So they created the sun and the moon and the planets and everything. And it still wasn't enough. So eventually he asked the morning star and the evening star and the sun and the moon to create people to put on the earth. And so there's a long story about the morning star, who's a male, traveling across the sky and coming up against all these obstacles that evening star put in his way. And those 4 stars that hold up the universe, they turned into these animals, mountain lion, bobcat, bear, and things. And they fought Morning Star. And eventually he beat them and got past them. And then the last obstacle was the moon. And he got around her. And so they were going to have a baby. So Evening Star wasn't really into this. So she kind of prolonged the whole procedure by saying, well, we're going to have a cradle board. And instead of, a lot of you husbands will relate to this, instead of telling him exactly everything that he needed from the beginning, she told him one thing at a time, and he'd go out and get it, and then he'd come back, and she'd tell him another one, and he'd go back and get it. So this goes on for a while. Eventually, he creates this cradle board. And so if you look in museums, British Museum, I think there's remnants of one at Genoa. I don't know if there's one in Lincoln or not, but all of our cradle boards have the same sort of design to them. They're all marked with a star at the top. And that star is there so that we always remember who our Father is, the morning star. And so you'll see sometimes in writing that they say that that's a Skidi story. Well, it's not. It was a Skidi that told them the story, but it's a Pawnee story. It goes for all of our bands. So they had that first child as a little girl named Chudaki. And then the sun and the moon did the same sort of thing, and they have the first little boy. His name is Pidusky. So Chudaki and Pidusky are put into tornadoes, and they're put down onto the earth in this tornado. And there's a very particular spot near Palmer, Nebraska, where Chudaki was put on the earth. And then where Clothes Boy was put is on a little place called Fullerton. And so that right there is kind of our Garden of Eden right in there. And from there, we spread up across the earth. Those first 2 people had children, and then their children had children. And those first couple of generations are usually referred to as the Kawadukas. And then from them come each of our 4 bands. So our modern day tribe, since, well, I say modern day, since the beginning of that, we have our 4 bands. So my band is the Chawee band. We have the Skeedee band, which is the biggest, the Kikahaki, and the Pitahawidata. And that last one, if you can't say that word, that's how we know you're not really Pawnee. So when I look at archaeology sites across Kansas and Nebraska, especially into the 18th century, I can tell you where each one of those bands was living. Eventually, we kind of all coalesced because of disease and Europeans and migrating tribes from other places. We all kind of coalesced back up here into the homelands where these Platte and Loup rivers are at. And that took a long time for that to happen. So that's our 4 bands. Who knows, beginning of time, there's a lot of history that gets skipped over with oral history. There's a lot of stories in there about animals and women and just kind of mythology kind of stories, wild tales that seem unbelievable. Eventually, though, there's one that pops up that helps us date part of our oral history with actual European history, years and things like that. So there was a man who had a dream, and in this dream, he was standing on the shores of a big river, and he sees this wild creature that's like a combination of different animals, and he's fascinated with it. And he tried to catch it, and it swam away from him. So he jumped in and he swam after it, and it took him down underneath the water, took him into this what we call an animal lodge. And inside, so we know what a lodge is, right? It's like an earth lodge. So inside that animal lodge, all the animals were having a ceremony in there, and they started teaching him things. Then he wakes up, and it seemed so real to him that he felt compelled to get up from where he was living and take off walking towards the east until he found this place. Eventually, he comes to what we now know is the Missouri River, the Keats-Waruxti, the mysterious waters. And just now dawned on me that this is in the background. So this is just here for you to look at. It doesn't pertain to nothing. So he comes to Keats-Waruxti, and he's standing there, and he sees this creature in the water, and he grabs it. This time he grabbed it, but he couldn't. He wasn't strong enough to keep it from pulling him into the water. So it pulls him under the water, and it takes him down, and everything happens just the way he had dreamed it. It takes him to an animal lodge. They go in there, and they teach him how to make earth lodges. They teach him how to make sacred bundles. They teach him all their ceremonies and their medicines and everything. And then he comes back up to the surface, and he brings that back to the people. He goes back to, trying to think of where, maybe right around Fullerton areas, you know where I'm talking about. And they call a big gathering, I guess, of all the different Pawnees to come to this. And he's going to teach them these things. So there were 2 villages that couldn't come. One, they were right in the middle of, there's some buffaloes that had drowned in the water of a creek, and they had been frozen in the water. And so they're kind of refrigerated, I guess. And they're butchering them. And before they could even get them all butchered, these wolves come in, and they were eating on those buffaloes when the people weren't around. Well, the wolves got frozen in the water. And so this place couldn't come to this gathering because of what they were doing. And so in the story, they get be called the Wolves in Water Village. This is important, so keep that in mind. So he goes off to the north, to the Elkhorn River Valley, and he comes across another village that they're right in the middle of doing a big ceremony, and they can't stop. They're not going to stop. And so they can't come to the gathering. And that village, they remembered it because on the earth, or on the lodges, not earth lodges, on the lodges there were all these pumpkins growing. And so that was the pumpkin vine village. So he comes back, and they have this gathering of everybody that can make it. And he passes out the knowledge of earth lodges and bundles. And eventually, there's a lot of compression of time here. Eventually, they decide to have what we call a doctor's dance. So this was a month-long ceremony, and they'd build a lodge, they would go into that lodge, and they would open up their bundles and perform their feats that were associated with their bundles. It's all secret, that's why I'm like being vague about it. So the very first place that this was done was on a hill over here by Fremont. And so it's one of our sacred sites. All of this, if you look at our archaeology, you're like, well, when was the first earth lodge built? Because you've got a big area where earth lodges exist. You know, roughly, we're talking maybe max 2,000 years ago. And it doesn't, at first it's like, that doesn't really sound like a long time since we're talking about the beginning of time, you know. But when you start looking at comparing that to like what things that you know that was going on in Europe or Asia, 2,000 years, that's a long time. That's a long time. So you can think about our people living in Kansas and Nebraska and South Dakota, going out to the front range of the Colorado, living over here on the west side of the Missouri and Iowa. All that time, these people were here moving around. We have no idea how big their population was. They were everywhere. And it contrasts a lot with like our modern day lives. And it's even hard for our young kids to fathom this, that such a large footprint. Well, how big of a population of Pawnees were there? Because right now, today there's probably about 3,700 plus. When we left Nebraska, we were about the same size. So it's just it seems fantastical, to think of that. And even I, with all the information that I'm privy to with different archaeology societies, different states, knowing where things are, every once in a while I just kind of have to pinch myself that I'm talking about our ancestors and so forth. The first time that Europeans ever came around us or met us was probably, I feel 95% sure, Coronado. We know a lot about Coronado because they had people writing books with him. But they spent a winter in where Albuquerque is now, in a pueblo. And while he was there was several people there that weren't from the pueblos, they were from the plains. And one of them, they started calling El Turco because of the way he had this wrap on his head. It reminded them of the Turks from northern Africa, or probably from Spain too. And they forced that man and then several others that we later found out are Wichita to lead them out across the plains and bring them, looking for the 7 cities of gold, So somewhere they're taking them out across the plains. It gets kind of vague. There's various spots where they find parts of the Spanish that they think is from Coronado. Somewhere out in Kansas, I guess they finally figured out that they're just leading them out into the middle of God knows what. And I have a strong feeling he was probably leading them, up here to the more Pawnees, and they would never heard of Coronado. So, but they figured out what he was doing, and they strangled him to death. And we don't know where he's buried at. Somewhere on the plains of Kansas, this first Pawnee was killed. So, for several hundred years, there were different Spanish expeditions that come across Texas and Oklahoma up into Kansas in this direction. And we don't know how much contact they did have. We have stories about how we got our first horses. There's a couple of competing stories. One talks about a man that dreamed of this horse, and then kind of like the story that I first told you, it seemed so real that he got up and he starts looking for this strange animal. And he finds this animal just standing out there on the plains, and he brings it back to his village, and then, it becomes this amazing animal because it can haul all kinds of buffalo meat and wood and all this other stuff. So it was this special animal. Then there's another story that says a little boy who was poor, and he made mud ponies, and then those ponies came to life, and that's how we got horses. So it just depends on how you want to look at it. But we're fortunate that we have a Pawnee archaeologist that works down at KU. And for, I don't know how long, he worked on a study with another archaeologist, carbon dating and doing DNA tests on horse remains across the plains. Not just for us, but for several tribes. And what's important for us is that he found that at least 2 horses had, I think both of them, had been foaled in central Kansas, and then had found their way to northeastern Kansas and eastern Nebraska. And we had them a lot earlier. You know, the common story was to say that no Plains Indians got horses until the Spanish were kicked out of New Mexico. We had horses probably 60, 70 years earlier than that. So we undoubtedly either met more Spanish, or we got some of Coronado's strays that got loose, or we went to New Mexico and got them, all of which could be true. But we had horses for a long time. And it plays into our culture. We were renowned for, other tribes would raid other tribes for war honors, you know, scalps and to fight and things like that. We raided tribes just so we could take all their horses. We would take off walking from here, and we would walk all the way into Texas or Oklahoma or Missouri and take horses from people in New Mexico and then ride back. So it's something that lives on in our tribe, you know, like these strong connections to these stories. It's something that we're very proud of. Every once in a while, if you meet somebody that's from Pawnee, you'll probably see them wearing a sweatshirt that says Pawnee Horse Stealing Club. And, you know, we like that. You know, it's kind of a good little honor that we like. So. But probably the next documented Europeans that you can say visited us, was in 1720 when Spanish military commander, I don't think he was the governor of New Mexico, he may have been, Villasur. I used to know his whole name, and now it's long. All I remember is Villasur now. I'd say Pedro, I might be right. But they came up here, they were going to punish the Pawnees. So we're thinking about these horse stealing expeditions, right? They somehow got it into their mind that the French were helping us by giving us firearms. And back there in that box, there's some flint or hammers off of a musket that holds flint that are definitely French. So they're not too far off. But I don't think there were actually Frenchmen here with us. I think they just visited us and traded, sold us things. But they were convinced that the French were encroaching on their territory. So they came up here to New Mexico, or they came up here to Nebraska from New Mexico, and I guess thought they were going to teach us a lesson, or I don't know. But somewhere over here, and nobody knows where the site is, on the land between the Loop and the Platte over by Columbus, they had encamped, thought that the rivers were going to serve as kind of a defensive barricade to us. And what they didn't know was that the Pawnee that they had brought with them, who was a slave in New Mexico, his name was Sistataka, which is close to Sistachutta, which is our word for fork. So I don't know if there's a correlation there or not. But anyway, he probably snuck across the river and helped plan out an attack on the Spanish. So in the dawn of, I used to know the date too. I think it's in August. Don't hold me to that. Anyway, so in the dawn hours, the Pawnees snuck across that river and attacked the Spanish and killed a whole bunch of them. There were, I think, maybe 40 or 50 that got back to New Mexico, but a bunch of the commander, the Franciscan monk, at least one of them, if not all of them, most of those people were killed, and I guess they're still out there somewhere. And the Spanish quit coming back up to Nebraska. They didn't come back for another 100 years. When Zebulon Pike came looking for the Pawnees in 1806, he found the village there at Guide Rock, went right past the one at Republic, not too far away, and had just been behind another Spanish expedition by a couple of days. And that Spanish expedition had given a Spanish flag, Spanish peace medals to the chief there at Guide Rock. It's contagious. And so when Pike shows up at that village, there's a Spanish flag flying up there. And there was one of our old past business council presidents, and I think he was on our chief's council too at the time. I heard him one time, he was talking about that, and he said that they took down that Spanish flag and they put up that American flag, and we've been fighting for that American flag ever since then. And so it's a great amount of pride, at least for the modern Pawnees, you know, that we've had this long relationship with the United States. But from there, you know, Pike follows the Arkansas, eventually gets out into Colorado, and he comes across about 200 Chawees at a place, La Junta, Colorado. I have to shift gears. About where La Junta, Colorado is, he comes across 200 Pawnees that were coming back from raiding the Utes. And he also mentions that they had been up in the mountains and had been picking a type of pine nut that they liked. So in my mind, that's how he found Pikes Peak. Because Pikes Peak is one of our sacred sites. There's an animal lodge on Pikes Peak, just like there is one at the Missouri River. That place, at least for my band, there's a bundle that's associated with there. And Evening Star came and touched the ground on top of Pikes Peak, and that's where we got our corn from. It's where all the buffalo come from, is right there in this cave right beside Pikes Peak. So it's a holy site, and you can visit it. You can drive right up to the top. It's real nice. So back again to like the size of our cultural landscape is so immense. You know, as from then on, everything gets real easy to document because of Americans and people writing down in journals, you know, when they would come out and visit. I've got a detailed account from a German duke, I want to say in the late 1820s, who came out with the Chawees and across Kansas on a buffalo hunt. And then a few years later, you can read accounts from the nephew of Washington Irving, the guy that wrote Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He was here in Nebraska, there was a Chawee village where Clark's, well, it's not at Clark's, it's across the river from Clark's. Went there, went to the Kickahawkee village, all the Skeety villages, and describes, you know, what people were eating, how they were carrying on, all the jokes that he heard, and all the things that he didn't understand. So it's real fascinating that I've taken several tours of tribal members to those sites, and all of us, you know, depending on which band you're from, like you can literally say, you know, out there in the middle of that cornfield, that's where all my ancestors right there lived right there. It's kind of a strange feeling to think, you know, nearly 200 years ago that everybody in this spot was related to you. And now there's only, you know, a handful of us. And where at the time there were several thousand in your band. It's led to some strange feelings when we have those things happen. But, so the 1830s, you know, 1819 I think was our first treaty. 1830s, we have some missionaries that come out. I believe his first name's William Dunbar and Samuel Alice. They were Presbyterians. Eventually they set up a mission just west of Genoa, and they fought and fought and fought. Finally, I think they just irritated us enough that so a lot of our South Band folks went over there and created a Earth Lodge village that was a combination of like 3 different bands. I skipped over that. So our Skeety band, everybody knows Skeeties, right? That's our biggest one, means wolf. The other 3 bands are commonly referred to as the South bands. So yeah, that's our Chawee, Kickahawkee, and Pittahawee Danta. Chawee is so old, nobody knows what it means. Petahawidata means the man going east. So remember that story that I was telling you about the animal lodge, the earth lodges? I think that's what that's in reference to. I may be the only one. And then the Kitkahaki is talking about a village in a little bottom. And then Skeety's wolf. The Loup River is French for wolf. It's named after them. So they convinced some of the South Bands to build an Earth Lodge village there beside their mission. It got attacked and burned. And then for some reason, we were just talking about this last week in the 81-degree sun in the middle of the field. Somewhere around there, all of the different bands started moving east towards where we were at over by Fremont. So at one point in time, just across the river from Fremont, you would find the Chawees and Skeeties living together. And then the Kitkahakis and Petahawidatas lived together just north of the town of Lashara, which Lashara is an Anglicization of Desadu, which is chief. You'll see that a lot in different names if you start picking up history books about Pawnees, Night Chief or Hawk Chief or Sky Chief. You'll see that Lashara, Nashara, Desadu, Nashara, any kind of combination of it. Our language is vastly different than English, where you'll see it as an L, an N, or an R. It's not an R. Don't, for God's sakes, don't say Russia. It kind of comes off as a soft D or a T, so that's what they were trying to enunciate. So in the 1850s, that's where we were living, I found this in an old pioneer history account, and I don't know exactly where it was. I don't think it's impossible to find out exactly where this man lived. But two Chawee chiefs knocked on this guy's door, cabin door, to ask for some water. And when he opened up the door, he shot the head chief right in the face and killed him. And so the other chief, the second chief, now he's the head chief. And I don't know if he ran or if he walked off casually. I don't know how it all unfolded. But he goes back to the tribe over here south of Fremont. And I guess all the settlers around here were just sure that we were going to descend down on every town and kill everybody. And so the governor, the territorial governor of Nebraska at that time, I pulled his name right out last week. He's got a county named after him. No. Dang, all their names after governors. Okay, never mind. Okay, so anyway, 1850s, look it up after you leave. 1850s, the territorial governor, he gets the militia, and they rally up with some cannons and everything, and they head off, and they're going to massacre the Pawnees. And I guess he went to that site because last week we found a monument that I didn't know of, and the archaeologist I was with didn't know of either, that said that there was a council there, I think in 55. I'd have to look on my phone at the photo. But we weren't there because we had left to go buffalo hunt with the Omahas. And we were in the Elkhorn River Valley near the town of what's now called Battle Creek. The reason it's called Battle Creek, we were camped there. And so the governor and the militia shows up with their cannons, and they were going to massacre us. The new Chawee chief at that time, his name was Pita Desadu, the people's chief, or man chief actually. He walks out there with American flags and peace medals from the different conferences and kind of diffuses the situation and calms everybody down. And the militia leave, and I guess we went on our buffalo hunt with the Omahas, I don't know. But out of that comes a conference down at Table Creek. I think is that the name of the town, or that's just north of Pawnee City, isn't it? Table Rock. So they have a conference there. They write a treaty. They take it to Washington, D.C. It's ratified by Congress, and then that treaty is what puts us on our reservation at Genoa. So Nance County is our first reservation. And we were there, I think 57 or 58, up until the time that we left in 70. Well, the very last Pawnees left in 75. It's a complicated story. So we were there for a while. And during that time, the American Civil War starts. They take all the soldiers out of Nebraska, or most of them, send them east to fight the Confederates. And so, for protection, they decided to enlist a company of Omaha Scouts and a company of Pawnee Scouts. The Omaha Scouts didn't work out because the man that they put in charge of them, he could speak Omaha, and he was married into the tribe, but he wasn't married into a very well-to-do family, and so nobody would listen to him or take orders from him. The Pawnee company, one of their officers had been living around here. He was from, I think, Manhattan originally, but he could speak Pawnee pretty fluently. He was very familiar to the tribe, but he was not married into the tribe, and so he had no problem being able to give an order, or at least tell the Pawnees what they wanted them to do, and then we would do it. And so we kind of outperformed the Omahas because of that interesting relationship. And it was successful. So pretty quickly they dropped the Omaha Scouts, and then they just enlisted some more Pawnee Scouts. When you go look at the enlistment records, they would generally, 19th century armies, they kind of wanted to fight in the summer. And so generally you'll see enlistments periodically for each year, and it'll be for weird time spans. It's not like today, you're in for 3 years, you're in for 5 years, whatever. You could be in for 3 months and then you're out. And then next year you'd be in for 5 months and then you're out. So that was the first time that they enlisted the Pawnee Scouts. They were issued mostly Civil War surplus. They all had Spencer 52 caliber Spencer carbines. It's a unique weapon. It's a repeating weapon. And then we were charged with fighting our traditional enemies. So we were all into it, fighting the Cheyennes, the different bands of the Sioux, and whoever else, that got in the way. Because you have to remember, when you're looking about all this time period that I'm talking about, thousands of years, all of this country was ours. The Rickraws they were part of us until about 1600 or so, and then they kept moving so far up the Missouri River that they became a separate tribe. We're related to the Wichitas, to the south. So Wichitas were in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. So for most of pre-contact history, the plains were all kind of occupied by one group of people that spoke a mutually intelligible language. And then when Europeans showed up, that space kept getting compressed and compressed and compressed, and more tribes started being either forcefully removed out here, or people started trying to get away from Europeans and migrating out here. And the resources became, what's the word I'm trying to look for? They're finite. Yeah, well, especially in the 1860s, 1870s, because now the Army is literally trying to kill all the buffalo to starve Indians. It didn't matter who you were. They paid people to do it. The Army did it. It was a concerted effort to exterminate a species, to put a people under control. And they succeeded. And it caused a lot of warfare. So you had more and more people competing over a smaller and smaller resource. And especially in the 1870s, with a lot of the severe droughts that came through, it wasn't just us that suffered. All the farmers that had moved here suffered too. Waves of grasshoppers that came in and ate everything that was green. It was especially hard on us because if you don't have the crops, then you have to depend on buffalo. And it was more and more difficult to find that many buffalo to feed, 3,000, 4,000 people. So in 1873, there was about 400, 450. There's a lot of unknowns about what I'm getting ready to tell you. 450 Pawnees went out across western Kansas hunting buffalo, And they ended up around Trenton, Nebraska. And by the time they got there, they had killed about 800 buffalo. So they had thousands of pounds of meat, their teepees, all their equipment, multiple horses for each person, all the tack that goes with the horses, kids. You can just imagine how much gear you would need to have to live, out across the plains. And we were ambushed. A bunch of people were killed. We don't know how many. It's a project that we've worked with the state of Nebraska on for the last 2 years to try to put some more definition onto a lot of the questions about Massacre Canyon. But for all intents and purposes, this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. So the survivors from Massacre Canyon walk from Trenton and North Platte. They get onto a train and they make it back to Genoa. And within a month of getting back to Genoa, our Chiefs Council met with the Indian agent there and told him, we're going to sell this land and we're moving to Oklahoma to be near our Wichita relatives. So there were about 300 people that just took off. They didn't even wait. And there's conflicting evidence as to whether or not they were brought back or not. The agent wanted the chiefs to send out people and make them come back. But then we find evidence where they actually showed up at the Kiowa agency in Anadarko, Oklahoma, way down by Texas. So the first group of Pawnees that leave Nebraska leave in October 1873, and they go live with the Wichitas. Somewhere in the winter of 74 maybe, there's a contingent of chiefs and leading men from the tribe that go down to Oklahoma to pick out a new place to live. And they come up on this hill on the north side of the Arkansas River, and they can see off into what's now Pawnee County. And when they're looking out across there, they see there's a whole bunch of persimmon trees in blossom down there. So they decide this is the land that we want. Persimmons and plums. There's still a lot of persimmons and plums there. So the biggest chunk of the tribe, the core of the tribe, leaves in 1874 and goes down to Pawnee. And then there was maybe 100, 150 people, mostly Skeetees, that just refused to leave. This is where they were put on the earth. They're not leaving. And they got raided a couple times. Some settlers slipped in, stole a bunch of their horses, and finally they had enough, and they decided to leave. The very last people, they came down in 75. The very last people that came down later on in that year were invalids and people that had disabilities. And in talking to a couple people here in Nebraska and then putting together stories from my family, I know that the Army provided ambulances and they took them down there in wagons. So by 1875, we're all in Pawnee County, Oklahoma. And how many people have ever been there? Couple? All right. So if you've been there, you've probably been to our homecoming powwow. So the reason why we dance on a football field, everybody else was like, what? That spot where the football field is in the fairgrounds was where our first agency was. Everybody lived there in teepees. I think even the Indian agent that came with us lived there in a tent. And eventually he builds his houses, or his house is the first building, naturally. It's built, it's still standing, and then a year later they build the next building. Eventually he I guess he gets tired of everybody just camping right there around the agency. And so he keeps pushing people to move out, fan out across the reservation, and build houses and settle down. A lot of people do. Our bands kind of go off in different directions from Pawnee, Oklahoma, and they start these combination of earth lodges and log cabins. Earth lodges are hard to build in Oklahoma because the heat makes the trees stunted. They're not nearly as big as they are here. So you can't really build earth lodges with the materials there like you can here. So there's a combination of teepees, log cabins, earth lodges that get built in different areas of the county. And depending on who your band is, determines on who you're living around. Some of it's associated with our bundles. We still have our bundle religion at this time. In the 1880s, he starts pushing for us to take allotments. So they wanted us to all take 160 acres and settle down and become farmers, which is kind of funny because we've been farmers for thousands of years. In 1893, there's a whole series of negotiations where they strong-arm us. They didn't want to pay us the fair market value for land. They wanted to pay us, I think it was like 25 cents an acre, which was under the value. And they said that if we didn't take it, they're going to seize our land. Let me back up a little bit. I'm getting ahead of myself. So when we left here, we sold this land in Nance County. The money from that was used to purchase the land in Oklahoma from the Cherokee Nation and the Creek Nation. So we bought and paid for that land. And then in 1893, the government decided we still had too much. So they wanted us to take each person get 160 acres, and then they were going to pay us for the remnant, and they were going to open it up for settlement. They didn't want to give us fair market value, so we only got 25 cents per acre. And if we didn't agree to it, they were going to seize it by eminent domain, not pay us anything, give it away. And so this is the first and only time that the United States did not negotiate with our Chiefs Council. Instead, they had each person sign the agreement. So it's a great document for genealogy because you see everybody that was alive and an adult at that time. But it's an illustration in how our traditional government was undermined when it didn't suit the purpose of the United States. So they took that, they opened it up, and we get scattered all across the county. And it's pretty quickly, people start getting cheated out of their land. Oh, you owe me because I gave you a cow, and now I need 160 acres. Things like that. And then there's, more complicated shenanigans involving the agent and oil companies and things. It's, no matter what tribe you're talking about, eventually you'll run into the same thing. So we don't have all the land that we used to have. We still have a lot, but not anything like what we should have. The land where we used to have, I'm going to get back to where I was starting. The land where we used to have the powwow is now a fairgrounds and a football field. And in our mind, that was Pawnee land. What we didn't know was that in 1893, when we were forced to take allotments, the agent just gave it to the town committee for the city of Pawnee. And so for 110, 115 years, we have periodically, when I looked at the documents, it's like about every 5 years, we would rehash this wound and bring it all up and try to take them to court and back and forth and back and forth. And it wasn't until 1968, the United States Congress had to step in and finalize it. And we still did it. The last time was when I was put on council. And we finally got all the documentation and we put it all to rest. It's like, we're going to quit talking about it. So we moved our powwow, we abandoned the city, and everything is now out on our reserve. So those few of you that's been there, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. Everybody else is just staring at me. So it's a crazy history. When we got to Oklahoma in 1879, they started building a boarding school. 1881, it opened. And it began a concerted effort to erase our culture. They were kind of already doing that, but now they were taking our kids. If you didn't surrender your kid, you wouldn't get food or you wouldn't get your annuity to buy food. There was a 20-year period when we first got to Oklahoma where we were literally starving to death. There were no deer, turkeys. There was no game at all in Oklahoma. Every animal had been extirpated. I found out as an adult that it wasn't until the 1940s that white-tailed deer were reintroduced to Oklahoma. And now, good Lord, they're everywhere. Turkeys were introduced in the 70s. And in my life, I've seen the growth of black bears and bald eagles. When I was a little kid, you never saw any of that. So in the late 19th century, none of those animals were there. And that's seems crazy to me to imagine that, but our people were starving. They would walk all the way to Coffeyville, Kansas, which is a long ways from Pawnee, Oklahoma, to beg for food. And so there's an innumerable number of families that they just disappeared. When I look through our genealogy records, it's pretty common to come across names that we've never heard of. There's whole families that they just ended. There's nobody exists anymore. Yeah, I could go on and on about that. So the boarding school was kind of the last vestige of the agency. It closed in 1958, and then we took possession of the buildings. And so since the 60s, the Pawnee tribe has used the former boarding school as our tribal headquarters. One of the newest buildings out there was built in 1934 during Roosevelt's administration, and we leased that to the BIA for their offices. We were an agency that took care of not only us, but the Otos, Poncas, Caws, and Tonkawas, who are from Texas. And so in the 30s, they first built an Indian clinic there. It's the Indian Health Service, sorry, I'm using our vernacular. So it's like a hospital. I was born there. It wasn't until the mid-'80s that they quit having births there and surgeries and things like that. So now it's just a clinic, but it used to be a hospital. So we have, in the 90s, they built a new one. We have a very up-to-date modern health system out there. And then we've started adding on to it. We've recently, within the last 10 years, we've purchased 1,000 acres in Oklahoma. We have land here in Nebraska. We've started a cattle business, mostly because of COVID, to make sure that there's a constant, dependable, not maybe not constant, but at least a dependable food supply source for beef. And we have plans, to eventually either add on to that herd with buffalo or replace the beef with buffalo. Our agriculture, it's still kind of floundering around, but compared to say where we were 10 years ago with our native seeds, corn most importantly, we're way ahead than where we were. And so now, when we have ceremonies and dances and things, we're actually able to eat some of our traditional foods. Still like a roast beef, though. It's pretty good. And like I said, I'm skimming over. How long have I talked? About an hour. An hour? Oh my gosh. See? All right, well, I'll wrap it up because they're like, hey, I'm supposed to talk too. But I've skimmed, trust me, I've skimmed over our history. I could just go ad nauseum with different stories, and I'm hitting the high points. So I thank you all for coming. This is a huge crowd. I'm surprised. I was not expecting this many people. So I hope I've educated you a little, and then I'll turn the microphone over here to my compatriots, and then they'll add on to what I was telling you. Thank you. I'll leave you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Our next speaker is Nancy Carlson, who will talk about Butler and Nance County Pawnee sites, as well as the Genoa Indian School. Nancy Carlson has a master's degree in and has worked in the fields of archaeology and anthropology. She and her husband, who is here this evening, where's he at? They're in the back. We're charter members of the Genoa U.S. Indian Boarding School Foundation. She has worked with the Pawnee on various projects. Help me welcome Nancy Carlson.
Well, I want to thank you all for inviting Jerry and I to come. But first I want to ask Matt Reed if it's okay that I speak about his ancestors. Is it okay? He knows his Pawnee heritage, as you have heard, and so I needed his permission. I am an archaeologist, so my presentation is from this perspective. As you can see, the Pawnee Nation, as Matt said, is made up of the 4 bands. Next slide. The Pawnee had been in this area for many, many years, as he told you, and they were smart. They built their villages near water for themselves, for their animals, and to grow their crops. Butler County is bordered on the north by the Platte River, and the Loop River comes in at the northwest corner. And their other streams include the Big Blue, Duck, Bone, Skull Creek, and others. So there was a lot of area for them to settle in. Next slide. The northwest corner of Butler County is where the Loop River joins the Platte, and it's the suspected site of the Villiser fight, and Matt told you a lot about that. One of the survivors from that encounter painted several hides about this, and this is the Segesser II painting, which shows where the 2 rivers come together. And we figure it's probably the Loop and Platte rivers. The exact location has not been determined, and ongoing projects are still trying to determine the location, and we have several people in the audience who have helped on some of those projects. Next slide. During this time frame, there was a large Pawnee village located on the Platte River Terrace near the town of Bellwood. 2 occupation episodes are evident. The earliest occurred in the period AD 1650 to 1750, and this was prior to the Pawnee having close contact with Europeans. And this was also during the time of the Villiser battle, so these Pawnee that lived here may have gone up and been involved in that. The later occupation was AD 1795 to 1800, and that was occupied by the Grand or Chow Band of the Pawnee. These separate occupations prior to and following the Pawnee acquisition of the horse, gun, and other European commodities have furnished archaeologists with excellent opportunities to evaluate the nature of Pawnee-European interaction. You can see the archaeological site here is 25 BU2. Archaeologists use a trinomial method to identify each site. The 25 is for the state of Nebraska. The middle 2 letters designate the county, and the BU stands for Butler. And the last 2 numbers are the numbers that show when this site was registered with the state. So this was the second site registered. Next slide. Another village during this time is called the Barkle or Skull Creek site. It was a large Pawnee Earth Lodge village on a prominent natural terrace overlooking Skull Creek near the town of Abbey. 3 lodges and a variety of other village features such as storage facilities, horse corrals, and meat drying racks were excavated. Structures showed the evidence of rebuilding, implying the community was abandoned and later reoccupied. On the basis of the pottery characteristics, the site has been dated to 1700 to 1750. This is spanning the period also of the first contact with the Pawnee, European contact with the Pawnee. And you gotta also understand, when the Pawnee acquired horses, they had to be closer to water, so some of the very early sites are up high terraces and the later ones are down closer to the rivers. Next slide. This was an impressive Pawnee village located near the town of Linwood and was mentioned in the journals of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark in 1804 and Zebulon Pike in 1806, as well as those of numerous other travelers through the 1850s. The village was occupied at least twice, the first time from 1777 to 1809, and the second time from 1850 to 1857. The latter occupation was the last for the Grand Pawnee as a distinct cultural group prior to their relocation to the Genoa Reservation in present-day Nance County.
It is believed that the Oto tribe also occupied this Linwood site during the 1820s. Missionaries in the 1850s and settlers in the 1870s noted over 100 earth lodges, defensive sod embankments, pony corrals, burial grounds, and a possible ceremonial structure. And they had very deeply rutted trails leading in and out of the community. Next slide. This map shows the location of Butler and of Nance County. There are many villages in this whole area, and other important sites around here included 3 of the Pawnee sacred sites, Tahawk, White Cliff, and Dark Island. They moved their villages around as resources were used up, as Matt told you. Other villages just to the east of Butler County are the Lashera and the McLean site, and then finally the Genoa Reservation to the west. Next slide. This is a photo that was taken of the White Cliff site, which is by Fullerton. Next slide. Lashera was a Pawnee village occupied 1851 to 1859, immediately prior to their removal to the reservation at Genoa. Observations of the village were made by a number of white travelers and early settlers, and this was also designated on the 1856 General Land Office Survey plat map. McLean is one of the villages occupied by the Pawnee before moving to the reservation in the Genoa vicinity. The date of the initial construction is unclear, although it appears to have been dated between 1847 and 1850, and it was probably occupied by the Skiddy Band. This is unusual because the Skiddy Band were usually west of the other Pawnee bands. However, attacks by the Sioux and others may have forced them there. Colorful descriptions of life at McLean, located near the present-day town of Lashara, are provided by the Moravian Church embassies, which was Gottlieb, Older, and David Smith. And they visited this village in 1851. They reported that the village had 80 earth lodges and almost 2,500 people. The last Skiddy left in 1859. This is a 1857 signing of the Treaty of Table Rock. Unfortunately, I think it's a creek there, but anyway, in which the Pawnee gave up all of their land except what is now Nance County. Next one. All 4 bands came together at the Genoa Reservation. There were over 300 earth lodges and more than 2,500 Pawnee. They were at Genoa from 1859 to 1873 to 75, when they were removed to Oklahoma. In the 1860s, this village was attacked many times by the Sioux, even though the government had said they would protect them. Next one. This is one reason why they organized the Pawnee Scouts in 1864, and Matt talked about them a little, and Broc will talk more about them. Next slide. One part of the treaty said that the government was to provide the Pawnee with a school where the children could learn to read and write. And this is part of the copy of the treaty. In 1866, the schoolhouse was built. The Pawnee children went to the school during the day, but were home in the evening. And you can see over here is the school, and this is part of the village, and the photographer was probably up on top of one of the earth lodges. Beaver Creek runs in between them, so I don't know how the kids got across to the school, but anyway. Okay, next slide. This was the schoolhouse with the Pawnee kids in front. And we talked some about it. We don't know. We think in part, especially for the girls, they had to go to school, put on these dresses when they went to school. I don't know if that's true or not. Okay, next slide. This This map shows the location of the different bands of the Pawnee village. And you can see the Skiddy are to the west. You can see where the schoolhouse is and the Pawnee Agency building. And this is from a book from by Hyde on Pawnee Indians. Next. The schoolhouse was owned by the federal government, so 10 years after the Pawnee had been removed, when the federal government was setting up its federal boarding school system, this building became the basis for the federal boarding school in Genoa in 1884. Plus, Genoa was also picked because it was many miles away from the reservation, and this way they separated the children from their families and from their tribe. Next. It was in operation for 50 years, and over this period of time had more than 4,000 students attend. Next one. More than 45 tribal nations sent their students to the Genoa school. These flags honor those students. There were only a couple of students from Pawnee who attended, because think about it. If you had to move from your homeland because of Sioux attacks, would you turn around and send your kids back to a school that had a lot of Sioux students? I don't think so. Okay, next slide. This is part of the scale model that shows that there were over 30 buildings in the 1920s, and the enrollment for each year during this time period was over 500 students per year. This school closed in 1934. Next slide. For the past several years, the Genoa Indian School Foundation and UNL Genoa Indian School Digital Reconciliation Project have worked to determine the students who died at the school and what happened to them. So far, we have identified 86 students who died at the school. Of them, 36 were returned to their home, 9 were buried at the school cemetery, and the rest are unknown as of yet. We had to apply for death certificates and that sort of thing to try to figure out where all this went. And the ones that are unknown are especially from the earlier years, like from the 1880s and 90s. Not as good a records were kept. The search for the cemetery continues this spring, and we're lucky here. Our state archaeologist is here, Dave Williams, and he helps with Judy Gosh-Kabosh at the Indian Commission, and they're in charge of trying to determine where these people are. Also, I want you to know these 2 websites up here. You can go to those and find out much more information. The Genoa Indian School Interpretive Center is open weekends from Memorial Day to Labor Day. Next one. In 1992, the foundation erected this memorial to honor the students who had died there. And we had a very nice ceremony to dedicate that. Again. Getting back to the Pawnee, in 1990 and 1995, there were more than 800 Pawnee ancestors and relatives repatriated from museums and other institutions and reburied in the Genoa Valley View Cemetery. The Indian War markers honor the 6 Pawnee scouts who are also buried there. More than 20 years ago, the Pawnee Seed Preservation Group started with Ronnie O'Brien and Deb Echohawk. My husband Jerry started growing corn in 2003. Jerry found this map of the reservation village and showed where the Pawnee ladies had their fields. He contacted the current landowners, and since they were growing soybeans in those fields that year, he was able to plant some Pawnee seeds there so they wouldn't cross-pollinate. And Jerry brought some of the corn in the back if you want to look at that. On the left, that one was the pearl white corn with the black spots, and on the right is the blue flower corn with 3 hoes that he found in the field. You can this is like 22 inches or so. This corn is a very old corn, and it has this very tiny stalk, and you can't believe it got that big of an ear on it. And talk to Jerry. Ronnie O'Brien and Deb Echo are the ones to contact if you want more information on that. And that's my part.
Thank you, Nancy. Now I introduce to you our final speaker, Broc Anderson. Broc Anderson received his bachelor's at Chadron State College in Social Science Education and his master's at the University of Nebraska at Kearney in history. Broc is the director of historic sites for the Nebraska State Historical Society and Ogallala, Lakota. As the former community engagement director at the Buffalo County Historical Society and Trails and Rails Museum in Kearney, Broc had the opportunity to work with the Pawnee Seed Preservation Society and Pawnee Tribe in Oklahoma for an event held at Fort Kearney honoring the Pawnee Scouts who served there. Broc's guest tonight is the board president of the Buffalo County Historical Society, and perhaps some of you may remember him from back when he grew up and went to high school right here in Butler County, and that is Chuck Prohaska. Chuck, do you want to stand up and wave at everybody? For Broc's portion of tonight's program, he will talk to you about the Pawnees' service in the Pawnee Scouts, an elite group of Native American warriors who served as auxiliaries for the U.S. Army. Their bravery and strategic contributions made them one of the most respected Native American military units of their time. Let's welcome Broc.
I like to walk and talk too. So, real quick, we're going to do kind of like a seventh inning stretch, but we're going to do it my way. So, we're going to take one big happy selfie together. How's that sound? Okay? So, when I count to 3, I want you to do a thumbs up, put your hands up in the air, say you love the program, whatever you want to say. But I want to see that you are happy, engaged, and you're ready to rock and roll for this last part of 45 minutes of a program. No, bad joke. Okay. So ready? We're going to count to 3, and then we're going to do a selfie. Oh, gotta get my camera turned around. Are you ready? Okay. Gotta chop my head off just a little bit. 1, 2, 3. Very good. Very good. You all pass. Yeah, absolutely. You want to retake it? Is that what you're saying? Oh, you're all standing up, ready to go. We'll do it one more time. Yeah. All right. Let's finish off the rest of this program here. So, for most of us, we're pretty familiar with who the Pawnee Scouts were, right? There's a large body of work that's done about the Pawnee Scouts. And if you haven't read a book, I would highly suggest that you read War Party in Blue, Pawnee Scouts in the U.S. Army by Mark Van Delock. So, fantastic book. It's been around for a little over 10 years or so and is well worth the read. Part of me, I'm really, really happy to be here tonight. Again, you probably heard in my introduction, I'm Ogallala Lakota. My native name is Wamble Ishnala, which is Lone Eagle, and it was given to me by my Lakota Ina, Delphine Redshirt, who I was adopted into their family, but I also have a genealogical ancestry as well. So that's a big part of who I am. And when I first met Matt tonight, I was a little nervous. Our people haven't necessarily always been allies. In fact, we were the exact opposite. We were enemies for many, many years. And so the last time I got nervous in front of a public speaking crowd, it was in 2023, October 7th. I was the MC for a program out at Fort Kearney. And I got nervous for the first time in my public speaking career. But as I was informed later on in the program, it made sense because there was also 100 other Pawnee out in the crowd that were listening to me speak at the same time. So Matt, I'm really glad to be here tonight. And in some ways, I feel like I am the least qualified person to be standing up here and talking to you all tonight. I still have a lot of learning and life to go through, but at the same time, because of my Lakota heritage, I feel like there might be some qualifications that allow me to speak, having ancestors that were directly involved with some of that history that we have. Next slide. So, what is a Pawnee Scout? Between 1864 and 1877, there's over 1,000 Pawnee men that served as scouts, officially and unofficially. We're going to find out why that officially is in there. But next slide. Again, if I could reference who and why and what and where, all this book is truly phenomenal. And with your permission, I'd like to read a little bit about this. So, in the introduction, the story of the Pawnee Scouts is a tale of triumphs as well as tragedies. Although it is true that they helped to conquer the resisting tribes such as the Sioux, Cheyennes, Arapahoes, they did so because they perceived these tribes as a greater threat to the well-being of the Pawnee people than the mighty power that replaced them, the United States. Unfortunately, the United States government never properly honored the contributions of these men. Not only were these scouts denied pensions, but the government also insisted on eradicating Pawnee Native culture. Just kind of how Matt had just described earlier in his presentation. So we have these, what seems to be, what I would argue, kind of some conflicting entities in terms of these manifest destiny ideals, the United States wanting to further settle the West, but were actually an opportunity for many of these Pawnee men that wanted to ensure their way of life is preserved by serving in a very honorable way to fight their common traditional enemies. Next slide. As far as Indian Scouts, though, throughout the years, Pawnee were not definitely the first. We had Indian Scouts as long as there's ever been a non-native presence in the Western Hemisphere. So we can go back clear to the Pequot War, the French and Indian War, Pontiac's War, the American Revolution, the War of 1812. In fact, we can say that we had Indian Scouts up until the 1940s. With the Code Talkers. So with the 1866 Army Reorganization Act, the president is authorized to enlist and employ in the territories and Indian country a force of Indians not to exceed 1,000 to act as scouts, who shall receive the pay and allowances of cavalry soldiers and be discharged wherever the necessity for further employment is adapted, at the discretion of the department commander. So prior to 1866, even though we have some Pawnee Scouts in 1864, 1866 makes that more official, up and through 1947. Next slide. And so we kind of talked about that briefly with Mark's book, but why would the Pawnee assist the U.S. military in fighting these other native peoples? Well, because one, the Lakota were seen as the more dangerous enemies to the U.S. federal government, too. And two, there's an opportunity for employment and additional annuities. So we have, this Pawnee view of having these opportunities in front of them. Next slide. Additional context for these Pawnee Scouts in the U.S. military. Again, as a Lakota person, from my own perspective, there's a lot of previous and current tensions in the 1850s and the early 1860s between American migrants, and the tribes that are further north and west in Nebraska, up into the Wyoming, South Dakota, Montana, Colorado. This is where we're having a lot more of that geographical resistance from these tribes. Again, when the Pawnee Scouts are enlisted, there is a major focus around protecting the Union Pacific Railroad line. Because as many Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux had figured out early on, that the railroad was going to be the meat to further westward expansion and settlement into the what they perceived to be open land and territory. And again, as Matt had discussed, relocation and dispossession of the Cheyenne, Lakota, and Arapaho to and near Dakota territory. Ever since we have these non-native settlers, these non-native entities, the government, whatever you want to say, that further pushes people west and west and west, and that causes conflict as well when it comes to competing for resources, whether it be buffalo or corn or water or whatever it may be. Whenever you have a larger entity that is taking land, resources, it's going to create this conflict that you see in the 1860s and 70s. Next slide. Okay, how we doing? We have here the map of Nebraska in 1874. What year did Nebraska become a state? 1867, right? And usually when you think about Nebraska becoming a state in 1867, it all just formed, right? It was all just that way, but no, that's not necessarily how Nebraska came to be. That might be your notion, but in a way, we have all of this territory in Nebraska that's still either largely unsettled by non-native individuals, or that have no, it seems arbitrary to be calling us a state at this point with these kind of boundaries, when we have native peoples throughout the western part of the state. Sure, we might have Butler County, where we are today, in the eastern part, but we have a large swath of territory where these Pawnee Scouts are aiding the U.S. military in trying to combat the Sioux, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. Next slide. Specifically, behind this, we recognize this individual. We have Frank J. North and Luther North. They have an interesting story. They're from Ohio. Their upbringing is near the Pawnee Reservation, and they're frequented by many Pawnee people on the reservation itself. Really, it's because of Frank North that we see this Army Reorganization Act. He's going to be a real mover and a shaker in trying to keep and utilize these scouts that know the terrain, that know their enemy. They know how to fight in this western part of the United States. But at the same time, we respect and we honor the Pawnee Scouts for what they did and who they are today. There's a double standard view going on here, folks. Next slide. We'll go to, this is just a picture of the Union Pacific line with some Pawnee Scouts protecting it. They pose for a picture. Next slide. Again, going back to this double standard. So on July 11th of 1869, this is from a diary from Frank J. North. We see that they marched this morning at 6 a.m. with 50 of my men, Pawnee Scouts, and 200 whites with 3 days ration followed by a trail till 3 p.m. So usually we have these Pawnee Scouts that are leading the way. They're deciding where these Sioux encampments are, where the enemy may be. Next slide, please. And not everyone is as accepting to these individuals wearing this blue coat. At one time, it's been documented that the Pawnee that were in the Scouts, in the U.S. military, were actually bringing great shame to that honor. For once, when we're talking about how the Pawnee would actually go and fight, I specifically mentioned the Pawnee stripped themselves for the fight, taking off their saddles and as much of their clothing as could be dispensed, and still have something to distinguish themselves from the hostiles. A lot of this early native-to-native fighting that's taking place is done with as little to no clothes as possible. It was seen as a way to, it was dragging you down, whereas it was seen as a barrier to actual fighting. We'll go on to the next slide. So we have all these individuals that are serving on as these Pawnee Scouts, and one in particular we have by the name of Fox Chief. And so Fox Chief recalled through one of these early engagements that in May of 1869 the Pawnees scouted near the North Platte River when they spotted 2 horsemen in the distance. Major North sent whatever he says is his truth and shot Throat and another scout to investigate. North gave, I'm losing my place, North gave whatever he says is the truth, his own horse. The horsemen turned around to meet the Lakota warriors, and a high-speed chase followed. One Lakota was quickly overtaken and killed. Whatever he says is the truth pursued the other man and engaged them in one hand-to-hand combat. So what I'm getting to is the Lakota had escaped on Major North's horse, and the scout company eventually caught up with the man and killed them. If it wasn't for this Pawnee individual, it would have been likely true that Fox Chief hadn't saved this individual, that Frank North would have actually had the same fate. So next slide. And that's who Fox Chief is. He goes by a different name by ruling his son by the 1920s, and we'll see why that's a disadvantage. Next slide. As far as where a lot of these Pawnee scouts are engaging with Sioux and Cheyenne and Arapaho, again, we're talking 1860s, really kind of down in this neck of the woods here. And then by the time we get up into the Powder River country, where we have some squabbles with the Sioux and the Cheyenne and the over a major war that's taking place. Again, really about dispossession, relocation of people's lands, and the U.S. military taking advantage of that by having Pawnee scouts involved to help fight that fight. Next slide. After 1877, so again, one summer, like Matt had said, you might have served for 3 months. The next summer, you might have served for 5 months. But after 1877, the Pawnee Battalion was forever disbanded. Unfortunately, the United States quickly forgot about a lot of these sacrifices that the scouts had made, going back to Fox Chief. He moved to Oklahoma in 1873. People started calling him by his new name, ruling his son. Because of non-native culture wanting to make things so tightly knit and put in a category in ways that it makes sense. Ruling his son, in order to get his official monies from his service when he had enlisted at the age of 40 for the Pawnee Scouts, it took a special act of Congress to grant him a pension of $20 per month in 1924. So doing the math between 1864 and 1877, we're talking 50 years. Just before his death in 1928, at nearly 100 years of age, it was increased to $50 a month. Next slide. And so today, that injustice has been wrong, or that wrong injustice has been more or less corrected and highlighted in many things that we've been able to do here in the state of Nebraska. So whether it be the October 7th program out at Fort Kearney, where the Pawnee Scouts were located with Frank North, the Archway, Michael, I know you had said that one of the last things that you had done out at the Archway was putting together the Pawnee Scouts a display there, or having this Pawnee Scouts Memorial Highway recognized here in the state. The Pawnee Scouts have a very honorable history that needs to be celebrated any chance that we get. And so having people like Matt up here to talk about that. And again, I get to piggyback off this just a little bit because of some of my previous experience with the Pawnee at Fort Kearney. And I really hope, Matt, that as I continue in my career as a historian, that we can keep and maintain some of these connections and continue to build our relationship, not only between Nebraska and Oklahoma, but even then as a Lakota and a Pawnee. So I want to thank you all tonight. With that being said, last slide. I don't know if you wanted, so the sponsors for tonight, Humanities Nebraska, the Butler County Area Foundation Fund, the Butler County Historical Society, Destination David Creative District. We're all integral parts. Again, I want to thank the community here. This is a huge turnout. And I want to thank Gina, Matt, Nancy. I'm just very, very happy to be here. So thank you all.
Wow, what a wonderful program. Matt, Nancy, and Broc will be around for a little while here after we're finished. And you'll be more than welcome to come and visit with them. But we're going to move right into the door prizes and the thank yous, because I know that's what everyone's waiting for. So pull out your door prize ticket. Tricia, can you turn up the lights, please? There she goes. So get your door prize tickets out. I'd like to have Louise Neiman, Russ Heller, Gabrielle Comte, and Steve Barleen come to the front and bring your prizes with you. We've asked these people to come up as they represent the sponsors, collaborators, and the BCHS. They have tables in the back, as you might have noticed. You can visit with them and learn more about their organizations. Before we draw our prizes, we want to thank Humanities Nebraska, who is one of our grant funders. Thanks to them, you were able to attend this program for free. We can pay for the rent of this facility, mileage to our speakers, and for the promotion of our events in 2025. Second, we want to thank Butler County Area Foundation Fund. It is due to their support that you enjoyed a free bottle of water and a kolache made by Jackie Moshak. And that's always a hit, isn't it? Third, we want to thank Destination David Creative District for being our local $300 sponsor. These events aren't free by any means. They cost around $1,300 per program to put on, and that doesn't pay for anyone for their time. Our speakers tonight even volunteered their professional expertise and waived their speaker fees for the benefit of Butler County history. So we should put our hands together for them again. But the bills must be paid, so every dollar that the Butler County Historical Society receives from grant funders and local sponsors, as well as donations you make here, are imperative to making these programs happen. So visit with these good people later and learn about Bone Creek Museum of Agrarian Art, Butler County Area Foundation Fund, and Destination David Creative District. And of course, chat with Steve Barleen or Greg Fiala to learn more about the Butler County Historical Society, which is your host for these history programs. Now let's draw for prize winners. The first prize to be given away tonight is from Bone Creek. Louise Neiman is representing Bone Creek, and they are giving away a set of coasters.
I wrote it wrong. It's Gabrielle Comte.
Gabrielle Comte, our apologies.
Okay. You get to pick, and you get to read the number. Okay, 334044.
You want to bring it over here so I can see
You
it?
can see it.
334044. Ending in 044. Okay, great. Destination David. That's going to be Louise now. Okay, Louise Neiman is representing Destination David Creative District, and they're giving away a t-shirt or a coaster.
Two coasters and a t-shirt.
Oh boy. Okay, 334099. 099. Raise your hand if you have zero. Okay, there we go. Right over there. Butler County Area Foundation Fund. Russ Heller is here representing the Butler County Area Foundation Fund. They're giving away, I'm not sure what they're giving away.
So, what we're doing is giving away a $100 grant in the name of the recipient to the organization of their choice.
Okay, $100 grant to the recipient's choice to their favorite charity here in Butler County. Okay. And get with Russ later to
Yes, we'll need to get the
determine
name.
who that is. 334-166. 166. Do they have to be here?
Yeah.
166. Is anybody claiming it? Going once? Twice? Gone.
Okay.
334085. There we
go.
go. 085. Get with Russ here later.
We need to get
I
your
go
name.
whisper in her ear about what she has to do.
And last but not least is, actually we have a couple. The Historical Society, Butler County Historical Society is giving away a t-shirt. Nope, now it's a tote. Okay. Remember, I'm Gina, so.
The t-shirts never fit in.
Okay, so it's a tote. And that goes to 334-135. 135, okay? Want to run it to the back there? 135?
It's supposed to be he can do it if you want. We don't have. You want to give a book too?
Do you want to give the book too? Sure. Okay, we're going to give away a Towns of the County book. If you recall, that came out last year. And that goes to 334-013. 013. Okay, right here.
Greg, will you deliver her a book?
Greg?
Greg, will you bring her a Towns of the County book?
Okay. And then, certificate. Another tote? And this. Oh, okay, now Steve would like to also give a gift for the speakers. So we have a tote and an honorary certificate of membership to the Butler County Historical Society. So we'll have 3 of those.
So thank you, guys. I appreciate it. You guys represent us. And you're an honorary membership, and you will probably be the only person in Pawnee, Oklahoma, Butler County Historical. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Matt. Make sure I got these right. Yes. Thank you, Brock. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, and we have some additional news for the Butler County Area Foundation Fund. Dorothy Vavrina won that, and she has decided to donate it back to the Butler County Historical Society.
Thank you.
And in closing, this event was organized by the Butler County Historical Society's Program Committee, which includes Gina Barleen, myself, Diane Duran, Carolyn Dvorak, Jeannie Hine, Carm Fiala, and I mentioned Gina. We'd also like to acknowledge Steve Schmidt for making the initial contacts with the presenters of tonight's program. That's very valuable. Our committee is working hard to create a great program season for you in 2025. The next program, and keep in mind this is going to be Gina saying this, so the next program is on Monday, June 16th, same place, same time, and Diane Durr and myself will be the organizer and presenter. The program will be about the history of Butler County Fair. So we have a lot of great things planned. It's our 150th celebration for the Butler County Fair. So as far as the program, now the pressure's on. It's now me that has to start working on it. But if anybody has memorabilia from the Butler County Fair, please get with me. We are collecting anything, any type of collectibles. We'll keep them at the Rising City Library until it's time for the presentation. Make sure you get with me. You can call the Rising City Library or call me. But we are starting to collect all of that memorabilia for this presentation. We're planning to have a great program. Again, we have a lot of history. It'll be hard in an hour and a half to talk about the 150 years, but we're really looking forward to it. And now, thank you to anyone who was willing to rack a chair or two, and feel free to hang around and visit with our speakers and visit with your friends and neighbors. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you in June.
I just wanted to, if anybody has any questions, we would take it now, or just come up and visit with the speakers. And thank you to Diane for doing all that reading.